Welcome to this evening's webinar. As you can see from the screen, on the subject of woodland management planning. My name is Martin Glenn, speaking on behalf of Aboutrdi Associates Limited, and also accompanied here by Will Richardson, who will be this evening's speaker. So if you could please ensure that you leave your microphone on mute during the talk so that we can hear Will speaking. And then use the chat function to ask any questions, which we'll come to at the end. You can find the chat function by moving your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and you should then find a little icon that says chat. If you click on that, and a sort of window will open and you can type in your questions to that. And as I say, we will then come to them at the end. If you're on a tablet, if you sort of tap on your screen and then tap on the bottom, you'll have the same. So. And as I just mentioned earlier on, we are now recording this webinar and we'll be making it available online. Thank you, Will. So just very briefly, many of you will have heard this bit before. So Aboutrdi Associates are a limited forestry and project delivery company working on forestry focused projects, but also other sectors such as climate change, renewable energy, environmental conservation, etc. And also delivering training and consultancy. And this evening, there's Will Richardson and myself, as discussed before, both chartered foresters with lots of experience in the sector. And in terms of this evening's webinar, it's part of the Woodland Management Focus Area Pilot, which is being funded by the Forestry Commission through the Woodlands Management Forestry Innovation Fund. What we're doing through that is identifying clusters or focus areas of unmanaged woodlands, using geographic information systems, and then delivering this woodland webinar program and providing landowner support and advice in the focus areas that we've identified. So if you are in one of those areas, we may well approach you to talk to you about further additional support that we can provide. And then also undertaking an evaluation of the woodland status against something called the United Kingdom Forestry Standard, which you will have heard about on an earlier webinar and will mention later on this evening. So that's it from me. So just I will hand over to Will, and then as I say, I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you've got any questions, put them in there, and we'll come to those at the end, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question. If you'd rather us ask them, then just put that in your comment, and we'll do that. So right, over to you, Will. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, woodland management plans. So we'll just go through sort of an introduction to management planning and some key, hopefully, takeaways for you. It's obviously a very important tool to us as forest managers, woodland owners, etc. It can be a very simple process, or it can be much more involved and complex, depending on the nature of the woodland in question, size, constraints, operational activity that you want to carry out. We'll discuss these themes as we go through the presentation. The plan can also help you access further grant support for your woodlands, such as Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier funding, and it can also help provide evidence that you're managing your woodland with regard to HMRC, inheritance tax and capital gains tax exemption purposes as well. So I thought it would be useful. We've obviously done a number of these sessions so far and covered some pretty expansive topics. Just useful to recap where we've been in the last few weeks. I can't believe it's already been, well, the best part of a couple of months, hasn't it? We sort of started off by that general introduction to woodland management and introduced this concept called the UK Forestry Standard. Now, this is going to play an important role in our management plan that we'll look at it. Basically, we'll spend the time this evening looking at an example woodland management plan, example maps, etc., and how that meets the UK Forestry Standard. We obviously had a session on operations, so we talked a lot about thinning, felling, coppice management, that kind of thing. We had a session on grants and licenses. We had a session on timber marketing. There was a previous session, which sadly I couldn't be part of, on products. I think that focused on production of wood fuel, particularly for people's own use. And we also talked about forestry and climate change, and of course the consequences of wind blow events, obviously following on from late autumn, early winter storm that we had. So all these themes will come into play in the production of our management plan. It's also, as I said, useful just reminding ourselves what we've got in this UK Forestry Standard. And essentially, your management plan will reflect that and be measured against that. So if you go down the Forestry Commission approval process on your management plan and secure a long-term felling license, it will be measured against the UK Forestry Standard. So this sets out our legal requirements of good woodland management practice. So it covers biodiversity, climate change, historic environment, landscape, people, soil, and water. Okay. So those are our underlying principles that will carry through in tonight's presentation. As I've said previously, there's no separate requirement for forest products in the UKFS, but it's an important reason to manage your woodlands. I think I mentioned previously that we import 80% of our timber requirements in the UK, and of course, it's hard to track where that 80% actually comes from. What type of woodlands, how are they managed? I think good forestry practice also includes, where possible, where achievable, the production of forest products, timber, saw logs, firewood, etc. And I would certainly make that, if your woodland is capable of doing it, one of your objectives. So we also introduced previously this concept of appraising your woodland and carrying out, if it's not this, constraints, opportunities and threats, something similar. And using online tools to help with your planning. So there's lots of easily accessible information out there. Magic, the Forestry Commission map browser being a couple we spoke about last weekend in the Forestry and Climate Change course about soils, geology, that kind of thing as well. So conducting that as a desk-based exercise and then going out and surveying your wood and understanding what you have is obviously critical to producing a good quality management plan. And of course, we want to bring in this concept of inventory information. What trees do you have? How many do you have? What species are they? What form are they? You know, are they nice straight trees that would go on to make good quality timber? If not, why? So we look at things like tree health. Are they being affected by any pests and diseases, etc. Maybe again, following on from last week's session, abiotic factors like drought stress, waterlogging, etc. can also affect our trees. So getting to understand all this data and then maybe doing some measurements. Again, we don't have time this evening to talk about what we call forest mensuration, which is the measurement of standing and felled timber. But the basic information you want to be gathering is average height of your timber, average diameter, and the number of trees per hectare. And that allows you to calculate the volume that you have in your woodland. And that's useful for things like applying for a felling license. So if you're thinning, you can then assess how much timber, how much volume you might be bringing out. And if you wanted to sell that timber, giving prospective purchasers, timber merchants and contractors an idea of how much timber you will be selling. So all really useful information, all really important information as part of your management and producing your management plan. So I'm going to bring up an example woodland in a second, but let's just have a think about setting our objectives. So I think it's good to be concise when you set your objectives and make sure that they're achievable and measurable. And you can certainly look at the UK Forestry Standard key themes, biodiversity, historic environment, etc., as maybe part of that objective setting process. But ultimately, you as the woodland owner, you as the woodland manager are going to decide, you know, how do I want to manage my wood? What do I want it to do? What do I want these objectives to achieve, and can I measure their success? You're going to find out from this constraints, opportunities and threats assessment and your field survey, collecting data, and how that will feed into your management planning process, and then ultimately how you're going to monitor and, like I say, measure that success. Are you achieving your objectives over time? Now, in this Woodland Management Plan example, I'll show you it sets out things like monitoring processes and sets it out quite nicely for you. So let's just have a look at our woodland, our example woodland. So we've got about 13 hectares there. It's in the Vale of York. It's on flat land surrounded by a mixture of agricultural arable, combinable cropland and permanent pasture as well. And there's a few other woodlands dotted in the landscape connected by things like mature hedgerows, etc. And we've divided our woodland here into 4 subcompartments, and each subcompartment is based on the species, the dominant species within that. So this was a plantation woodland, but it's relatively old. It's getting on for 150 years old, so it's starting to form quite a diverse species base already. But it's in need of management, and we'll find out why it's in need of management as we go through the woodland management planning process. So I'm going to bring up the example management plan. I'm just going to have to fiddle about with the technology just for a second. So hopefully this works. I'll have to stop sharing and then reshare. So fingers crossed I get this right. Screen. Does that look okay, Martin?
Yeah, that's fine. Well,
that's brilliant. Okay, thanks. So here we go. We've got I've used the Forestry Commission template. You can use your own as long as it's compliant with the UK Forestry Standard and meets those principles within the standard. That's fine. There are plenty of other templates that you can use, and we're going to introduce another one in a couple of weeks' time called the My Forest system. It's all online, web-based woodland management planning tool. And loads of helpful resources within that program to help you through that process as well. And it's a chap called George who's going to be presenting on that for us. So here's our woodland. We've given it a name, Derrington's Plantation. Like I say, it's about 13 hectares. And the first bit here is the Forestry Commission making sure that you have met the requirements of the UK Forestry Standard. So you're setting out clear objectives, a clear management strategy. You've identified constraints within the woodland. Again, we're going to look at those as we go through what those constraints might be. And you're coming up with a felling and an operational program. The other thing is consultation. So the UK Forestry Standard likes you to talk to things like neighbours and other stakeholders. For example, let's say you have priority habitats nearby. You would be required to consult with, let's say, Natural England about that. Would your management processes affect those nearby priority habitats? Again, the woodland that I've chosen, I've provided an example of that so you can look at that. So consultation is an important part of this process. And of course, it's always good to talk to neighbours, particularly if you need to cross their land for management purposes or timber extraction purposes. And then are you going to update and review your plans? This is all part of monitoring and measuring the success of your objectives. Do you need to change your strategy accordingly? Are you meeting those objectives? If not, why not? You need to review and update. So the Forestry Commission template, it's set out, all these forms are, boxes and sections and whatnot. And obviously there's property details, boxes, and I won't go into that in any detail. I think it's the meat of it here. So let's think about these objectives that we're setting. And I started off by saying, keep them as succinct as you possibly can. That way it's easier to measure and monitor what you're achieving. So I've got 4 objectives in this particular woodland. One is about silviculture. So what I want to be doing is restructuring this plantation woodland, planted about 150 years ago. It's probably been felled off once in its lifetime, but the general age structure within the woodland is pretty much even. So all the trees are getting to about 70 years old. Everything's roughly the same height, roughly the same age. And we want to restructure this, give it a bit more diversity and make it more irregular. And the reason being that that woodland will become more resilient to the threats that we've identified, whether they be immediate pest and disease threats or future threats through climate change related stresses, waterlogging, drought, high wind, etc. So we want to be also looking at tree health. So again, we're quite keen because this particular woodland has larch and a proportion of ash in. We know that their species is particularly susceptible to visit pests and diseases. Because it's got a conifer element, it is capable of timber production, and I think that because of that, it should continue to produce timber wherever possible. So again, applying good silvicultural practices. We want to be looking at through silt thinnings and selective fellings, etc. We want to be looking at maximising the timber production potential within that group. And then we're also very keen to improve it for nature conservation as well. And you know, we have in this particular woodland identified veteran trees. They're likely to be bat roosts. So of course there will be things like European protected species present as well. So there are key objectives. So I've made them quite succinct. Of course, they are quite broad brush in themselves, but they are things that we can measure and monitor. And of course, they are directly relevant to what's in the UK Forestry Standard as well. Your objectives may be different. There may be a more focus on nature conservation, there may be a greater focus on recreational activities, for example, but you would need to assess that within your own individual woodland. So under the Forestry Commission template, there's a place you can put plan reviews in and provide a summary of I mean, I would always do an annual monitoring summary and measure your annual monitoring summary against those four objectives we've set. You know, have you done any thinning work? If so, what were the dates? How much timber did you get out? That would be in your monitoring summary. This in the plan, it's a 5-year review, but I would do a separate annual monitoring summary. You could do it more often if you wanted to. We're then going to talk about the survey. What are our survey findings? So let's start off with our desk-based survey. I've put a list of maps there and we'll look at those. We'll come back to those in a second. So our survey would include the geology. What's the underlying geology? So we're on sandstone here with some clay superficial deposits, quite typical of the Vale of York. And our soils are loamy soils with naturally high groundwater and a low fertility. That phrase low fertility isn't necessarily something to worry about with woodland management. It's fine. You don't necessarily need to have any inputs into your system in terms of fertilizer. In fact, I'd advise against it. It would only probably encourage weed growth and invasive species such as balsam to thrive. But it's those soils, loamy soils with naturally high groundwater, so going to be fairly wet in periods of the year, for example, over winter. And that helps us then inform us on species selection if we understand those soils better. And of course, climate is another important factor there. So we're looking at our annual rainfall. Of course, Vale of York isn't extremely high; it's quite low, and you know, a fairly mild temperature range there as well. So we're not looking at mega extremes of temperatures, and again, could suit a wider range of species as well. We've got a little description in the landscape. It falls within the Vale of York. It's obviously flat. Dominant land use is cultivated arable land and already has a low proportion of woodland cover. But we know from looking at the National Character Area Landscape Assessment that once upon a time there was a much wider historic enclosed medieval forest in that area. And that some of these woods could be remnants of that old medieval forest area. So again, it might be of interest in terms of historic environment, etc., and how field boundaries may be linking to other woodlands, that kind of thing. So all these are sort of desk-based research that you can easily access this information. So from my field survey, I'd go out, I'd look around the wood, and I'd start to think about what my constraints are. So on my cot assessment, I found that we've got Himalayan balsam encroaching into the woodland there, which is a worry. We'll discuss why that might be and what we could do to maybe counterbalance that. And management may be difficult because of access across other neighbouring landowners' land, farm tracts in particular. They may not be strong enough to withstand heavier forestry equipment, for example. So there are two key constraints that we need to bear in mind. I've started to identify threats from pests and diseases, so again, part of my COT assessment. So here we've got known threats, obviously balsam, one of them, ash dieback, phytophthora and larch, and then we know there are deer, roe deer in particular, and of course grey squirrels in the area. So we can start to provide a little bit more description about that in the plan. Again, we don't have a great deal of time to go into detail now about that. As I mentioned, in our objectives, timber production is an important objective. We want to be producing quality harvestable timber, and we need to be looking to do that. So our management principles will say, well, when we do thinning, we're going to be favouring the best stems. We're going to be allowing those stems to grow on and produce good quality soil. And we can start to pick out other elements in this description as well. So how are we going to restock? So I've referred to the ecological site classification decision tool that we looked at last week here to help me inform those based on my knowledge of the site, geology, soils, climate, etc. And a little bit about how we're going to look after any restocking. So I've mentioned tubes, for example, to protect broadleaves. But because I want to restructure the plantation away from that even age and make it more irregular, make it more diverse, I'm keen on promoting natural regeneration where it occurs. Obviously, if you are getting natural regeneration, then it's generally suited to the site. Obviously, you don't want a lot of ash or larch coming up. They might cause you problems in the future. So it's something to bear in mind. And then I've got another objective here of nature conservation. So how am I going to improve my woodland from a nature conservation perspective? So I'm going to make the commitment to reduce the conifer element by around about 30% overall. And that's probably gradually moving away from the larch in the wood. Again, that threat of the disease killing the trees, it's an idea anyway to start phasing that out over the time. Unless, of course, you get the disease and you're required to fell. I'm going to manage my rides and keep them nice and open. Keep a nice diverse herb layer, let light in, encourage ground flora to thrive and create that woodland edge habitat. I'm going to increase the levels of standing and falling deadwood. I'm going to coppice some areas. I'm going to protect and manage my veteran trees. And like I say, I'm going to restructure away from this even age plantation to what we call a continuous cover, i.e. we're not going to clear fell. We're always going to make sure that there's a canopy of trees on the site. So that's kind of my general description of what I'm hoping to achieve in that particular woodland. Under this Forestry Commission template, and what you are required to do under a UK Forestry Standard compliant management plan is start to understand what designations there are on the woodland. And this is where your searches on Magic and the Forestry Commission tool help you with that. You may also need to write to your local authority to find out whether or not you might have tree preservation order or it's in a conservation area. A lot of the local authorities are putting that information online now, so it's a lot easier to find out about it, but sometimes you have to write to them. It can take a while to get that information back sometimes. So, for example, these are high-level biodiversity designations here, triple SIs, special areas of conservation, etc., etc. Are your woods within or adjacent to these areas? And we can start to think about protected species. So, for example, I'm pretty confident there will be bats in my woodland because I have veteran trees. And it's quite a nice place for a bat to roost in a veteran tree, and quite a good place because I know I've got grass meadows nearby. There might be good places for the bats to forage at night for their favoured food sources. Other considerations, for example, protected species, dormouse, unlikely in my wood. It's just not the right habitat for it. But there may be great crested newt in nearby watercourses, for example. you know, you need to be careful about things like management operations, allowing runoff, siltation that could affect those habitats. You can start to look at scheduled bird lists, that kind of thing, other mammals, other reptiles as well. You can find out this information from it's the National Biodiversity Gateway Network information, and from the ecological local ecological records office as well. So the one for North Yorkshire, very good. They reply very swiftly to requests for ecological data. You do have to pay for the service, but it's a very good service. You can find out all this information through that. And of course, whether or not you're capable of doing those surveys yourself and identifying these species yourself. In terms of the historic environment, my woodland, there's no known scheduled monuments or archaeological features within the wood or adjacent to the wood, but I have got veteran trees. And of course, they are part of the historic environment, having been around for a long, long time. I mentioned about the character, the landscape character assessment being on the Vale of York. And in terms of the people, priority, we have a public rights of way that, and I'll show you on a constraints map in a minute, that also runs through the woodland as well. We've got water courses in the woodland. Again, I'll show you on the maps. This will all be a bit better pictorially in a second. We've gone through those constraints checks. The next thing is what habitat types are present. So we know it's classified as a lowland mixed deciduous woodland, but it has a conifer element within it. And we know that adjacent to my woodland is another priority habitat, non-woodland type of a lowland, good quality grassland meadow. So again, we need to map that and be aware of what that is. I've done an assessment on the structure of the wood in terms of the separation between broadleaf and conifer. So I've got 60% broadleaf and 40% conifer. The age structure, it's more uniform, less uniform in terms of the broadleaf, but it's still pretty uniform. And the conifer is very even age, so very even age. 70, 75-year-old conifers within there, mostly Scots pine and again, the My Forest tool that George will introduce in a couple of weeks is very good at providing additional resources to help you through this assessment yourself. And you can see down at the bottom here, it starts to give you a sort of a pictorial indication of what we're thinking about in terms of veteran trees, middle-aged trees, understories, saplings, etc., and then even-age woodland, what that might look like as well pictorially. So I'm going to start thinking about these threats so I can complete a risk assessment, if you like. So what are my threats? What are the risks to my woodland? So I can start to talk about specific plant health threats. So this is where our diseases come in. So we know we've got a proportion of ash, and therefore likelihood is it's going to have ash dieback. And it forms around about 5% of the broadleaf element. So it's not significant. But what do we do if we lose that ash? What species might we consider if it is lost? How are we going to manage that process? Obviously, we've got to think about safety as well, particularly if those ash trees are next to the public right of way. We've got larch in the woodland, so we've got to think about the larch disease in a similar way to the ash, but the larch forms a higher proportion in our wood. So again, what are we going to do to deal with it, and what are we going to replant with? We're going to have a little strategy about management of deer. So what I'd like to do in this particular woodland is monitor the level of deer browsing that might be occurring. And we're going to put in what's called a deer exclosure plot to monitor that. It may be very little, may not be at all significant, and therefore do we actually need to do any deer protection from deer or deer control? So just spending a small amount of money can allow us to make those decisions. Squirrels, yes, we will have those, definitely. How are we going to deal with those, shooting, trapping, etc., and monitoring the numbers that we've got and seeing if they are reducing over time. Now, this will only work if your neighbouring landowners are also helping out in terms of that process of keeping on top of those squirrels. Rabbits might be a problem, particularly if we're looking for natural regen, might come in and do a bit of nibbling, so we can look at surrounding farmland. Have they got warrens in hedgebacks, etc., etc. Again, what are we going to do to protect? So we might use temporary spiral guarding, that kind of thing. So these are all just part of our risk assessment. We've then got considerations about water and soil might be impacted, and I mentioned about priority species, water courses being affected by our operational activity and how we'll deal with that. The site's pretty flat, so we're not expecting any runoff from, even if we're bringing in quite light machines, we wouldn't expect too much soil damage and therefore runoff into water courses. So all these are fairly low threats to our particular woodland. Again, where it is, Vale of York's not famous for its high winds. It can be quite windy, but we're not on a hilltop on an exposed east coast or west coast. So any damage from wind, any risk from wind is low. But we can help make our woodland more wind firm by providing that sort of irregularity in terms of age class within the canopy. We know we've got Himalayan balsam. I'll talk about that in a second. We can look at that in terms of the mapping. This will quickly take over, and it will impact on ground flora and your ability of your woodlands to regenerate successfully. So if you have it, if you can control it, I would recommend controlling it. We've got a public right of way. We identified that. So we need to let users of that public right of way, if we do have people in felling trees, be aware people are felling trees in the wood, and also keep it clear as well. It may form a ride through your woodland anyway. And then we've got a quick sort of risk assessment about the economic side of it. Now, I would always keep my sort of numbers separate to my management plan because timber markets fluctuate so much. It's possibly not beneficial to start putting firm numbers into your plan at this stage. You'll be wanting to assess the market at the time when you think you're going to fell, and then work out the numbers. Is it going to be viable to do it? Are you going to get a return from that timber? So it's things like, what are your operational costs? What do you require in order to get that timber felled? Do you need to go over somebody else's land? Do you need track improvements, etc.? Those kinds of things you bring into the equation. But what I do know what I'm going to do is through thinning and selective felling, I am going to improve the standing quality of my timber over time. So hopefully, it will become economically viable to manage it. And then we're talking about diversity here and climate change and resilience to that. So I mentioned about moving from this even age structure to more irregular structure and continuous cover forestry. So that should help bring in that diversity and make the woodland more resilient to threats, future threats. Okay, so I'm not going to read through all of this. Our management strategies, basically building on all that research that we've done, all that information previously in the plan, I'm going to start listing my management intentions. So what do I mean by continuous cover forestry? What do I mean by thinning? What do I mean by selective felling? These are tools that I will use to help me meet my silvicultural objective. Likewise with tree health, what are the tools that I'm going to apply? What's the strategy I'm going to apply to meet my tree health objective? Same with timber production. So I'm going to have to be talking about harvesting, what we do with harvesting residues, woodland rise tracks and drains, how we look after those, etc. And then finally, our nature conservation objective and what is our strategy to meet that particular objective as well. Okay, I just want to spend a bit of time looking at the maps. Here's our stakeholder engagement. So I've mentioned a number of stakeholders here. So obviously talk to the owner of the woodland, of course, make sure they're happy what you're proposing. The local authority, that might be regarding public rights of way, or as I mentioned, planning constraints, DPOs, conservation areas. Always good to inform the local parish council. That might be useful in terms of local users of the public rights of way. And bring people on board. Positive messages are always a good thing. Talking to nearby farmers about access via farmers, and we know that we've got this priority habitat adjacent to the wood. Therefore, I want to talk to natural woodland about what we want to do. and it can impact that adjacent priority habitat. And then I've got a monitoring table here as well. So how am I going to monitor the success of my objectives? So for example, silviculture, I know what I want to do is make the stand more irregular. So through annual inspections and photographic records, can I see that happening over time? If not, why not? What's affecting the wood? Is it a tree health issue that might be affecting that? So I've set out this monitoring schedule so I can start to measure my success. Hopefully it will be successful. Okay, so what I want to do is go back to the slides now. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to get back onto the share screen. Yes. Hopefully, is that okay? Can you see that, Martin?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Okay, let me try that again. How's that?
It's working fine now. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that.
It's 22 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. So let's look at actually this in reality. Well, again, sorry, on a screen. But hopefully these slides will give you a better understanding of what we want to achieve with this particular one. So there's the woodland. So let's have a look at the constraints within that woodland. So we've started to, through our survey, we've mapped those constraints. So I've got a key here, and again, you can produce hand-drawn maps. Obviously, the more information, the more accurate you can provide, the better. And the My Forest tool that George will introduce will help you do this digitally. They have a digital mapping process for you to use. So we found where the public right-of-way is. There's an overhead power line down in the bottom southeastern section of the wood. We've got a watercourse running pretty much through the centre of the woodland there. We found that there's Himalayan balsam on the edge. And then there's that priority habitat there in that shaded brown colour along the western edge of the wood. We plotted where our veteran trees are. That's a very useful thing to do, help you inform your management, where you're thinning, how you're thinning, etc. So there's some of those key constraints that we found and mapped in our woodland. So all those tables you looked at in the management plan, it's a lot easier just to put it on a map. You can see them there, nice and easy. And obviously, if you do start to identify things like priority species, then again you can map where you found those as well. So that's our constraints map. I've done a species map. So again, split that up according to the compartments that we'd separated it into A, B, C, and D. So our key species, obviously, we've separated it into larch and Scots pine for the conifers. And then I've called it mixed broadleaves. It's probably majority oak and birch, but there is some sycamore, ash, etc. as well within that canopy. So there's our species map. And we can start to think about our operational map. So a little bit more information on this one. So again, I've put some notes for each compartment, what we're planning to do within our woodland. So year one, because I know I'm going to thin out that Scots pine where that Himalayan balsam is, I want to get on top of that prior to any thinning. So I'll probably go in with a strimmer and bash that back as much as possible. And then year two, I'm going to thin that Scots pine, and then I'm going to do a very quick follow-up of controlling Himalayan balsam after that. Year three, I've identified in compartment A, I'm going to copy some hazel and alder back, and I'm going to leave mature oaks as standard. I'm probably going to do that on a relatively long time scale, 10 to 12 year rotation. So it's kind of really focusing on nature conservation in that top part of the woodland there, and hopefully producing some useful coppice products into the future. Year four, I'm going to selectively fell the larch. So really take a lot out and start to encourage natural regeneration within that area. Unless, of course, I do get a identified larch disease, in which case I'm going to have to bring that forward, that felling forward. And in year five, I'm going to thin out my mixed broadleaves. And I'm going to favour the oak within that stand and mixed broadleaves. And then ongoing, I've got some ongoing management principles here, ride management being one of them. So during my thinning operations, I'm going to widen my rides, I'm going to open them up, and I'm going to keep them mown. So it creates a nice, rich, diverse herb layer, creating that woodland edge habitat. That's very important. And I've identified my veteran trees, and I'm going to look after those by careful halo thinning, maybe not too much, not opening them up too much, so they become can become stressed in that way and prone to wind snap, etc. But careful halo thinning around each during that thinning operation. So there's an operational map to give you an idea of what we've spoken about in the management plan into practice. So I think I'm going to stop there. And yeah, just thinking about next week's webinar, but I'll hand over to Martin to talk about that and hopefully get some questions.
Thank you very much, Will. That was great. Yeah, we've got lots of questions. So just before we go on to those, the webinar slot for next week is free. And as we put in our email, if there's anything you'd like to talk about, you know, perhaps a subject that we haven't covered today to one you want us to cover in more detail, or we've already talked about and you want us to do again, then please do let us know. If you just drop Will an email at that address, or reply to the email that Erica sent you earlier on today with joining details, then we'll let you know as to what we're going to be doing next week. The week after that, on Tuesday the 22nd, as Will mentioned earlier on, we've got George Dennison from the Silver Foundation, who's going to be talking to us about the My Forest management planning platform, an online management planning platform, which I think if this evening's talk has been of interest and relevance to you, then I think you'll certainly find that of interest, because it's a means to prepare a management plan online, and one that's accords with UKFS and Forestry Commission requirements. So right, I think what we're going to do now is, if we start the chat, start the questions. We've got plenty of those, but we'll try and keep to time. So first one is from Anna, and she said, can I ask her questions on her behalf? So first one, Will, is where can you find the average rainfall temperatures for an area?
Met Office website's brilliant. Yeah, it's got those various weather stations across the country, and you can focus into your local weather station. There's an interactive map, and it will give you all the details you need: rainfall,
yeah, great,
max annual temperature, annual temperature, mean temperature, yeah, sunshine hours, a lot of data on there.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, if I'm not absolutely sure about this, Will, but I think I'm right in saying that that information isn't available on the Met Office app. It has to be on the actual website.
Yeah, go to the website. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, don't go onto the web and the app on your phone or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So next up, Joe Cartwright. Joe, you've got a few questions. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask those?
Yes. Hello. If you have trees with a tree preservation order, would you know about it? Does the council have to notify you?
Yeah, good question. It's up to you to find out, really. It should be in your deeds, the deeds that go with the property, whether it's a domestic dwelling or even if it's, you know, let's say woodland deeds for that woodland property. It should be in there. Whoever did your conveyancing should have highlighted that. But you can find out, and I recommend you do. I mean, obviously a woodland in the middle of Vale of York's highly unlikely it's going to have anything on it, but I always just write to the local authority just to say, do you know if this has any covenants or
how long is it since they were introduced? Would it be in your deeds if you've sort of had the land 50 years or something?
Well, you should have been notified as the owner if that did happen. You're part of that consultation process. You're an important part of that consultation process, so you should have been told that was going to happen. Yeah. I'm not a planning expert. I
mean, tree preservation orders have been going on since certainly more than 50 years anyway. I think, you know, as Will said, if you buy a property with one already on, it should be on those deeds, and your solicitor should notify you of that fact when you you know, do your searches and exchange of contract. If it's then if the tree preservationer is served on the property after you've purchased it, you should, as the owner, be notified. But having said that, it hasn't been, it has been known for things to go wrong. So as Will said, absolutely do check to make sure. Most local plan authorities now have got it online, and you can usually check that online somewhere. So
yeah.
If not, as Will says, do absolutely good, because with anything in the law, ignorance is no defence. I'm afraid.
The other one was about veteran trees. How do you define a veteran tree? Is it size, age, species?
It's a good question. Really good question. There's some great stuff out there. Woodland Trust have loads of stuff on veteran trees. Lots of information on their website, as do a gov.uk Forestry Commission pages as well. But I suppose in summary, any tree, any age, any size, any species can become a veteran. It means it's got, dead bits and rot holes and lots of interesting ecological niches within that particular tree that could be habitats for lots of other species, bats, invertebrates, fungi. Generally speaking, a veteran tree generally is quite old, a few hundred years old. You often see them in hedgerows. They've been growing there a long time, and they're taking a long time to die. So they've got all these interesting ecological niches within them. But yeah, a young or 50-year-old birch tree could be classified as a veteran. If it's covered in holes and fungus and everything else.
Thanks, Will. I'll put a link in the chat to there's various information, as Will said. There's also something called the Ancient Tree Forum, which includes a definition of veteran trees and ancient trees. I'll put that in the chat now and send that to people. Certainly worth looking at. Yeah. So, Joe, I think you also asked whether or not that plan that Will just put up earlier on will be available as a guide. I'm not sure. Will you able to include?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's just an example. It's not a true reflection of that particular woodland. It's just more than happy to make that available. That's quite all right. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. All right. Great.
But it's very much made up.
Okay. Good. All right. Okay. Thanks for that, then, Joe. So, Mark Corner, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Will, thanks for showing us a pretend real-world example. That's much more useful than a sort of theoretical discussion of a plan. My question is about what happens to these plans. It'd be great if they were publicly available, if you could find out what the owners of woodlands neighbouring your own were planning to do, but I presume that isn't the case. But are any publicly available, do you know, or are they confidential to the owner?
It's a good question. So yes, you agree to make the document available, particularly when you go through the consultation stages. If you want a UK Forestry Standard compliant plan, you say, yes, I'm making this available for comment. And of course, your felling license application goes on a public register. So yes, in theory, but you'd have to contact the Forestry Commission. And obviously there's data protection issues there, but contact details of owners, etc. You can actually easily find out through the Forestry Commission web browser tool which woods have approved management plans on, which have felling licenses on. There are layers on there that you can tick and identify that information. Now, whether or not you'd get a copy of the full plan, I doubt. It's just whether or not, are they under a management agreement with the Forestry Commission?
Thank you, because it's a great resource to have available. So if they were accessible, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Can I'm just going to ask Crispin, are you still online? And if so, would you like to unmute yourself and add anything to that or not? Crispin?
No, happy to.
Hi,
yes, I'm still online. I'm not going to attempt the camera because the children are downstairs on the broadband, so just have to visualise. I'm still here. I was just typing in the chat box just to comment.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, it's fine. And kind of my understanding is that they're not publicly available as such, and they're not published. But as part of the development process. You know, applicants are expected to consult with relevant stakeholders, and in my mind, neighbours are relevant stakeholders, so they should be sharing their thoughts and views. So if someone is developing their management plan and there's a woodland next door, then I'm sure the local woodland officer would be happy to help try and make that connection, because it makes sense, you know, and ultimately, when you're considering issues such as felling sequences, having an understanding of what's happening in the kind of wider landscape is an important consideration. Thanks, Martin.
Great, thank you, Crispin. I should have introduced Crispin at the beginning. Crispin is the area director for the Forestry Commission for Yorkshire and the North East. So thanks for that, Crispin. So right, just looking down through the questions. A&M Parker. I'm sorry, I'm not sure whether it's a Mr. or Mrs. Parker. Right, that's you. I can see you there now. Yes, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Right, okay, it's Alan Parker and Margaret Parker.
Hello, thank you.
You talked very briefly about an exclusion area for deer for monitoring purpose. Could you just elaborate a little more on that?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Very useful tool. We put up 4 by 4 meter square plots with, we use sheep netting up to 2 meter tall posts with 2 meter, basically one width of sheep netting on top of another, essentially. And basically, you're not going to see anything for a couple of years. What you're able to do is to gauge the level of deer browsing within your woodland, because theoretically that protected exclosure should start to show natural regeneration. And I'd certainly locate it in an area where you could more likely to expect regeneration to occur. So that's under a canopy of or adjacent to trees of seeding age, so mature trees. I try and be a little bit bold with them and put them in a variety of different locations, particularly on larger wooded estates, just to see, you know, how deer are moving through the landscape. And it can tell you a lot. And if obviously you're not getting much difference, then theoretically, you know, you shouldn't have a deer problem. But that's not to say that isn't the case. There could be other reasons why you're not getting natural regen. But it's a fairly low cost way of assessing that. Do you need to implement deer management control? Is it necessary? So yeah, it's a useful tool.
Fine, thank you very much.
Thank you, Will, and apologies, Alan. I've only just seen your comment about asking a question on your behalf, so I've been trying to keep an eye on all the questions in the chat and things. So sorry for not saying that earlier on. Anyway, so right, got a few sort of comments and questions. There's John is asking about whether you know, what sort of size woodland is too small for this sort of treatment. He's got a 1 hectare woodland. And thinking that this sort of approach would be far more work than what they do on the trees themselves. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a small woodland management template that's available on the Forestry Commission website. That's via the gov.uk website. Go to the Forestry Commission and then look for the woodland management planning section and say there is a small woodland management plan template. I think for a 1 hectare plan, 1 hectare woodland, probably even that would be, you know, beyond what you need. Arguably for 1 hectare woodland, you don't really need a management plan. Having said that, you know, I think it's always good to have something written down in terms of what your objectives might be. And also, of course, regardless of whether or not you have a management plan, if you are felling trees and it's above the limit, you will need a felling license. That's 5 cubic meters per calendar quarter, or 2 cubic meters if you're selling that. And bear in mind the management plan does provide a felling license for that, if Will said. But yes, you know, for a 1 hectare woodland, if you're not doing much with it, to do a little bit of copsing, something like that, then no, you probably don't need a management plan. So have you got anything to add to that, Will, at all?
No, not really. I think they're all worth looking at, no matter what the size.
Yeah.
And I'd certainly understand what your threats are.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty important.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's a small woodland. You don't need to go into the level of detail I've just presented on.
No. So yeah, you know, as Will said, it's certainly well worth knowing about you know, the various threats or sort of designations there are on woodlands, and that's what part of the process of writing a management plan. So even if you only quickly look at that for a 1 hectare wood and you know, just make sure you've covered those things off, then that might be enough. So good, okay. And there's a sort of related comment there actually from JP, which I think is very worth reading out at this point. He says, in order to make a sensible plan for the future of your woodland, you really need to fully understand its history and current condition. And, you know, and I think that applies for 1 hectare woodland as much as it does for 10 hectare or 100 hectare woodland, really. So that's relevant there. So good. Okay, I'm just going through the sort of comments and questions. One there from John, who's saying, not unknown for local authorities to only think about putting on a TPO when the owner asks what its status is. I couldn't possibly comment on that, but yes, I think that's something that some of us might recognise. Let's just say that. So a comment there also from Tristan. Thanks for that, Tristan, about biodegradable tree guards and shelters. You might want to look in the chat if you know that. There's been a lot of talk, you know, the last few years about tree shelters littering the countryside, and there's quite a lot of moves going on now to ensure that they are removed and recycled, and in future that some biodegradable ones are used. And there's lots of different, well, not lots, there are a number of different opportunities there, but there's one there in the on Tristan. So. And thank you also, Crispin, who's putting a link in the chat to the .gov.uk site, our Creative Woodland Management Plan section. Lots of really good information there. So do go to that if you're in any doubt. So, right, okay, I think that's covered everything. And it is, by sheer coincidence, a minute to 6 o'clock. So, so I think, you know, it's just for me to once again say that if you've got any ideas for next week, then do please let us know, preferably in the next day or two, so to give us a bit of time to have a think about that. I'll switch my video on, you know, just to give us some thoughts about that anyway. That would be good. Otherwise, Will and I will have a chat and we'll let you know what that subject will be next week. There will be one, regardless of that anyway. So I think just thank you, all of you, for joining us and for so much comment and questions and chat. It's been a really good evening, a good webinar. Thank you to Will for doing that, and Crispin also to helping out. And see you all next week. Thank you, everybody. Good night.